Tonight, we travel not to the far past, but to a place whose silence feels as ancient as any ruin. A place where streets stand empty, swings creak softly in the wind, and entire apartment blocks stare outward with windows like hollow eyes. This is Pripyat, a city built for the future, abandoned in a single day and left to the slow encroachment of trees, vines, and silence. It is the morning of April 26, 1986. The city of Pripyat stirs slowly, quietly, as though unaware of the shadow waiting just beyond its horizon. The first light of dawn spills across apartment blocks, touching balconies lined with drying laundry, gleaming faintly on windows that reflect the rising sun. The air is cool, carrying the damp smell of soil and early spring blossoms. Somewhere, a crow caws. It sounds sharp against the stillness, then fades into the background of a city coming alive. Inside one small apartment, a clock ticks steadily on a kitchen wall. Its sound is faint, but constant, marking time in a space where life seems ordinary, predictable, secure. A kettle whistles softly, releasing a puff of steam that fogs the glass of the window for just a moment. A mother pours tea into enamel mugs, the dark liquid steaming, filling the air with its earthy aroma. She sets slices of bread on the table, spreading jam carefully while her two children stir from sleep, rubbing their eyes, hair tousled. The father straightens his uniform, preparing for another day at the power plant. The room is simple, functional, but cared for. A table covered in oilcloth, patterned with faded flowers. A small radio sits on the counter, its low voice humming with the morning news, mixing facts and propaganda in that steady Soviet tone. "Glory to the workers of the Chernobyl plant," the voice intones, before shifting into a piece of classical music. The children laugh at something whispered between them, their voices clear, bright, unbothered by the solemnity of the broadcast. Outside, the city is waking. From balconies, women shake out rugs, sending clouds of dust into the air. Men light cigarettes, leaning against railings as they sip their tea. Buses rumble into motion, their engines coughing in the cool air as they prepare to ferry workers toward the plant. The streets are lined with young trees, their branches trembling lightly in the breeze. At playgrounds, swings creak in the wind, moving gently, as though children had only just left them moments before. In another part of the city, school children gather their books and notebooks, fastening buttons on coats, tying scarves tight against the lingering chill. Their shoes clatter down stairwells, voices rising as they call to one another. In courtyards, groups of them cluster, chatting, skipping, their laughter echoing between the tall apartment blocks. The smell of freshly baked bread drifts from a nearby shop, where the baker has been working since before dawn, sliding loaves from ovens, their crusts golden and crisp. A line forms quickly, baskets in hand, as families prepare for the day ahead. Everywhere, there is a hum of normal life. Radios playing, bicycles rattling along the pavement, the hollow thump of a ball as boys begin a quick game of football before school. The shops are modest but busy. Shelves with milk and eggs, jars of preserves, tins of meat. Posters on walls proclaim slogans of progress and strength, their bright colors slightly peeling with time. At the cultural center, workers prepare for an evening performance, sweeping the floors, adjusting lights, rehearsing quietly on the stage. The city is proud of itself. Built in the 1970s, Pripyat was modern, planned, a shining example of Soviet achievement. Families who lived here were proud, too, proud to be connected to the plant, proud of their homes, proud of the future they believed they were building. And yet, within all this pride, there is ordinariness. The rhythm of breakfast, the shuffle of shoes, the clink of cups, the hum of buses. For those living here, nothing feels remarkable about this day. It is simply another Saturday morning in spring. The Ferris wheel at the amusement park waits, silent, gleaming faintly in the sunlight. It has never been ridden. It was built for the May Day celebrations only days away. Its yellow gondolas hang still, swaying gently in the breeze, as though holding their breath. The families do not know that their city, full of laughter and breakfast and children and plans for tomorrow, is balanced on the edge of silence. For now, the silence is not yet here. For now, there is only life, moving steadily forward, hour by hour, step by step, in the way it always has. The morning in Pripyat stretches outward, and the city grows louder in its gentle, familiar way. Children gather at schools, their chatter echoing through wide hallways lined with posters. In classrooms, desks are neatly arranged, and chalkboards stand ready with lessons written carefully by teachers who arrived early. The smell of chalk dust mixes with the faint odor of polish from the floors, cleaned the night before. The youngest students file into their places, smoothing out exercise books, pencils aligned neatly along the edges of desks. Their voices rise and fall in bursts of laughter, quickly quieting when a teacher taps the desk with a ruler. Older students lean against door frames, whispering, exchanging notes, or sneaking glances at friends. In these moments, life is ordinary, predictable, the concerns of schoolwork, of lessons, of exams looming in the weeks ahead. Across the city, the hospital begins its own rhythm. Nurses walk briskly through corridors, shoes tapping softly against linoleum. The smell here is sharper, disinfectant, soap, a trace of iodine. Doctors in white coats carry clipboards, speaking quietly to one another. Patients wait in chairs, the shuffle of magazines, the occasional cough filling the silence. A young mother soothes her child with a lullaby, rocking gently as the child dozes against her shoulder. For them, this is just another Saturday morning, a day like many others. The streets outside grow busier. Buses rattle by, brakes hissing as they stop at corners to let passengers climb aboard. Workers heading to the plant sit quietly, some reading newspapers, others staring out the windows at the city moving past. Their uniforms are neat, their expressions calm. To them, the day ahead is like countless others, long hours, familiar routines, the hum of machinery, the comfort of repetition. Shops begin to open, shutters rising slowly, shopkeepers greeting the first customers with quiet nods. In bakeries, the smell of fresh bread is thick, filling the air as loaves are stacked carefully behind counters. Shoppers hand over coins, filling bags with milk, eggs, and vegetables. At the market, stalls display jars of pickles, apples, and potatoes, arranged neatly, a modest but steady abundance. The voices of buyers and sellers rise into the air, a chorus of ordinary life. And in the heart of the city stands the amusement park, still waiting, still silent. Its Ferris wheel gleams in the morning sun, gondolas painted yellow, their frames bright against the pale sky. It has never been ridden. It waits for the celebration that will never come. The bumper cars stand motionless, their paint bright, their surfaces gleaming faintly with dew. The entire space seems paused, as though holding its breath for the children who will never arrive. Elsewhere, libraries open their doors, their shelves lined with neat rows of books. Readers step inside quietly, the scent of paper and ink strong in the air. Some come to borrow, some simply to read in silence at long wooden tables. The turning of pages, the faint scratch of pens, the shifting of chairs, all form a kind of music, soft and measured. In these spaces, too, life continues as though unbroken, untroubled, untouched. And yet, woven through all these places, there is one constant, the quiet hum of the city itself. Radios playing softly in kitchens, clocks ticking steadily in halls, voices drifting from balconies. All of it blends into a tapestry of sound that feels eternal, as though it will last forever. The people of Pripyat do not know they are living in the final hours of their city-esque life. They do not know that this morning, so ordinary, will be remembered only through silence, through empty rooms, through photographs left behind on abandoned shelves. For now, all is calm. The city breathes, unaware of the shadow waiting. A teacher stands in her classroom, arranging her notes on the desk. She smooths out the chalkboard, writing carefully in neat Cyrillic letters. Outside the window, the voices of children drift upward, footsteps echoing against the courtyard pavement. She pauses, listening for a moment, then turns back to her work. Her lessons are simple: mathematics, reading, a poem to be recited later. To her, this is just another day of guiding young minds. The faint scent of chalk lingers on her hands as she straightens the books on the shelf, waiting for the first group of students to arrive. In a nearby apartment, an elderly grandmother tends to her plants on a windowsill. The pots are filled with geraniums and small herbs, their leaves stretching toward the pale morning light. She hums softly to herself, a song from long ago, as she pours water carefully from a chipped enamel mug. The air smells faintly of damp earth and green leaves, a miniature garden inside a small flat. Her day will pass slowly. A visit to the shop, perhaps a walk with a neighbor. But for now, the plants occupy her attention, each leaf cared for with gentle precision. Downstairs, children spill into the courtyard, their shoes scuffing against the concrete. They chase a ball, laughter bouncing between the tall apartment blocks. Their voices are shrill, joyous, unrestrained. A mother calls out from a balcony, urging her son to put on his cap, to tie his scarf tighter against the chill. He waves her away, impatient to return to the game. The swings creak as another child pumps her legs back and forth, the chains rattling softly with each motion. To them, the courtyard is a universe, filled with possibility, free from the weight of the adult world. At the edge of the city, a young worker pedals his bicycle toward the power plant. The road is wide, lined with newly planted trees that sway in the breeze. The air is crisp, filled with the faint smell of spring soil and the metallic tongue of industry from the plant ahead. He adjusts the strap of his bag, humming a tune to himself as he rides. His thoughts are on the day ahead, on the tasks waiting at his station, on the wages he will earn for his family. The plant is both ordinary and monumental, a place of work, a symbol of pride, a presence always visible on the horizon. Inside a shop, a woman arranges goods on shelves. Loaves of bread, jars of jam, tins of condensed milk. Her hands move quickly, practiced in the routine. Customers filter in, offering polite greetings, asking for flour, sugar, soap. Coins change hands, bags fill slowly. The air smells of yeast and flour, the faint sweetness of fruit preserves. She wipes her hands on her apron, glances at the clock, then returns to her work. It is a morning like many others, steady, predictable, unremarkable. At the cultural center, a pianist rehearses on a grand piano. The notes echo through the empty hall, each sound lingering in the air before fading. A janitor sweeps quietly in the corner, the bristles of the broom scratching softly against the wooden floor. The music fills the space, solemn yet comforting, a private concert before the day's activities begin. And always, the Ferris wheel stands silently, its gondolas swaying gently in the breeze. The amusement park is still, but it holds a promise of joy soon to come, or so the people believe. Couples walking by glance at it, smiling faintly, speaking of the upcoming May Day holiday, of rides and games and children's laughter. None know that the laughter will never come, that the wheel will never turn. For now, it is a symbol of anticipation, a beacon of lightness in a city proud of itself. The hours pass slowly, gently. Radios hum with music and announcements. Clocks tick in kitchens and hallways. The city breathes, steady and unhurried, unaware of what waits just beyond the horizon. For the people of Pripyat, this is life. Ordinary, simple, structured. Breakfasts, schools, shops, games, rehearsals. Each detail unremarkable on its own, but together forming the heartbeat of a city alive with expectation. It begins in the deep hours of night, when most of Pripyat still slept. The air was cool, damp with spring dew, the city wrapped in silence. In the apartments, curtains hung still, radios long switched off, clocks ticking softly. The streets were empty, save for the occasional patrol car or a stray cat darting into shadows. Then, from the direction of the plant, came a glow. At first faint, barely noticed against the horizon, then brighter, more insistent. A pillar of light rising upward, strange, unnatural, shimmering against the sky. And with it came the calls. Alarms sounding, telephones ringing, urgent voices breaking the silence of the city. In the firehouse, men stirred from their bunks. Boots were pulled on quickly, jackets shrugged into place, helmets grabbed from hooks. The air filled with the scrape of metal, the thud of feet, the sharp bark of orders. Engines roared to life, headlights cutting through the darkness as they sped toward the source of the glow. These were men trained to fight fire, to confront danger without hesitation. They did not know what waited for them at the plant. They only knew that smoke and flame were rising, and it was their duty to respond. The first to arrive felt the strangeness immediately. The fire did not behave as fires should. Flames leapt upward, colored oddly, tinged with blues and greens. Sparks cascaded into the night like falling stars. The very air shimmered, carrying a metallic tongue that stung the nose and throat. Yet there was no time to wonder. The plant's roof was ablaze, and men scrambled with hoses, directing streams of water against the inferno. The heat was intense, pressing against their faces even through helmets and sweat. One firefighter, stepping across debris, felt something sharp beneath his boots. He looked down to see chunks of graphite, glowing faintly in the firelight. He did not know, could not know, that these pieces carried a danger more insidious than any flame. To him, they were just rubble, obstacles to be cleared. He kicked them aside, focused on the task before him. Back in Pripyat, the families of these men stirred in their beds. Wives rolled over, sensing the absence beside them, then drifted back into uneasy sleep. Children murmured in their dreams, unaware that their fathers were standing on the edge of catastrophe. Windows glowed faintly with the strange light from the plant, but in the city itself, silence still held sway. At the reactor, the work was relentless. Ladders were raised, hoses uncoiled, boots pounded against concrete. The men shouted to one another above the roar of flames, voices raw with urgency. Smoke billowed upward, thick and acrid, filling their lungs with every breath. Sparks rained down, hissing against wet ground, searing holes in fabric. Yet still they pressed on, driven by duty, by instinct, by the belief that fire, once fought, could be contained. One man later recalled the sensation of heat that seemed not only to burn, but to penetrate, sinking into bone, into marrow. Another described the taste of metal on his tongue, the way his skin prickled, as though with invisible sparks. They did not understand the source. Radiation was a word distant, abstract, a concept for scientists and engineers. Here, in the immediacy of smoke and flame, there was only the work. Water against fire, men against disaster. The hours stretched on. Dawn began to pale the sky, casting light on the plant and the city beyond. By then, the firefighters were weary, their faces drawn, their uniforms soaked. They had fought with everything they had, and though the flames seemed subdued in places, the true damage lay unseen, spreading silently, invisibly, into the air, the soil, the very bodies of the men themselves. Back in Pripyat, wives rose from their beds, preparing breakfast as they always had. Tea steamed in cups, bread was sliced, radios flickered on with morning announcements. Children stirred, rubbing sleep from their eyes, unaware that their fathers were already changed, carrying within them the mark of a night's work that could not be undone. And yet, In those first hours, the men were still heroes in the truest sense. They had answered the call without hesitation. They had climbed ladders into smoke, carried hoses into flame, stood shoulder to shoulder against something none of them could comprehend. They did not think of fear. They thought only of duty, of protecting their city, of standing where others could not. Their story is one of bravery, but also of tragedy. For in their courage, they walked unknowingly into the arms of an enemy that could not be seen, touched, or fought with water and steel. Their lives, their health, their futures were claimed in those hours before dawn. And yet, for the people of Pripyat, for the workers of the plant, for the families who still slept in their beds, these men had bought precious time. As the sun rose over Pripyat, the glow of the reactor dimmed against the daylight. Smoke still curled upward, drifting into the sky, but the immediate flames were subdued. Engines returned slowly to the firehouse, their sirens silent, their men exhausted. Helmets were set aside, jackets hung on hooks, boots kicked off. The fire was not over, not truly, but for now there was a moment of rest. And so the city continued, unaware. Children went to school, shops opened their doors, buses rolled along their routes. The Ferris wheel gleamed in the sun, still waiting. Families planned for May Day, for celebrations, for the simple joys of tomorrow. But in the quiet corners of Pripyat, the first cracks had already formed, and the men who had faced the fire carried within them the truth of what was to come. In the city of Pripyat, the night lingered quietly, even as the glow from the plant grew brighter. Families stirred in their sleep, turning in beds, pulling blankets tighter against the early spring chill. Some awoke briefly, noticing the faint flicker in the distance, but dismissed it as just another industrial fire, nothing to worry over. For the wives of the firefighters, the absence was familiar. These men had often been called in the night, answering alarms, racing off in engines toward accidents or small blazes. A wife might roll over, noting the empty space beside her, and sigh softly before closing her eyes again. She trusted her husband would return, smelling faintly of smoke, weary but unharmed. Children, too, slept on, their dreams untouched by the crisis. A boy might shift in his bed, murmuring softly as the sound of sirens drifted faintly into his sleep. A girl might clutch her doll closer, unaware that the doll itself, sitting on a windowsill, faced the strange glow from the plant across the river. The city dreamed, wrapped in its ordinary silence, even as the world around it began to change. And in that silence, the families of the firefighters became unknowing witnesses to history. Their husbands, their fathers, their brothers were already standing in the blaze, already carrying on their skin the invisible weight of radiation. Yet at home, life continued with calm routine. A kettle left on the stove, bread sliced for the morning meal, clothes folded neatly for the day ahead. The contrast is stark and poignant. In one world, danger burned unseen. In the other, the peace of ordinary domestic life held strong, fragile in its ignorance. By dawn, the men who had fought through the night returned to their stations. Their uniforms were damp, heavy with water and sweat. Boots were caked with ash and debris. Helmets carried the marks of sparks and falling rubble. Yet their faces carried a different weight, pallor beneath the soot, weariness deeper than usual. Some felt a tightness in their throats, a sudden nausea, a pounding in their heads. They dismissed it as fatigue, as smoke inhalation, as the toll of a long night's work. But as hours passed, the signs grew clearer. One man, seated heavily on a bench, leaned forward, head in his hands, unable to shake the dizziness that clouded him. Another clutched his stomach, forcing down the rising sickness, assuring his comrades it was nothing. Their skin prickled, their eyes burned, their strength seemed to drain with every passing minute. They were young, strong, accustomed to exhaustion, yet this felt different, strange, inexplicable. At the hospital, Doctors noted the arrival of several firefighters, brought in with unusual symptoms. Their bodies carried no burns, no wounds, and yet they were weakened, fevered, trembling. Nurses guided them to beds, checked their pulses, recorded their complaints. Confusion lingered in every whispered conversation. What could fell strong men so swiftly, so mysteriously? Meanwhile, in their homes, their families waited. Wives prepared breakfasts, expecting their husband's return. Children tied scarves for school, unaware their fathers lay in hospital beds. The city still moved with its daily rhythm, but within it, a shadow had already begun to stretch. These men, brave, unknowing, had stood where no one else could. They had faced a disaster invisible to the eye, fought it as though it were only fire and smoke, and carried within them the cost of their courage. When the evacuation came, it was sudden, urgent, yet spoken with assurances. Families were told they would leave only for a few days. Buses would carry them to safety, and they would return soon. They left in haste, gathering only the essentials: bread, clothes, small bags. Many locked their doors, expecting to step back through them within the week. Some even left tea cooling on tables, toys scattered across floors, books open where they had been reading the night before. But they never returned. The city froze in that moment, as though time itself had been stopped by an unseen hand. Now imagine walking through the streets of Pripyat as they are today. Trees have pushed their way through pavement. Vines creep up the sides of buildings. Windows gape open, glass shattered or long gone, curtains fluttering in the breeze. The Ferris wheel still stands, its gondolas rusting, its frame creaking faintly when the wind passes through. Bumper cars sit in their place, unmoved, their paint peeling, their surfaces layered with rust and moss. It is an amusement park without laughter, a celebration that never came. The schools are perhaps the most haunting. Step inside a classroom, and you find desks still arranged in neat rows, textbooks abandoned, notebooks left open mid-sentence. The blackboard bears chalk marks faded with time. Children's drawings remain pinned to walls, faded to pale outlines, but still visible. Houses, flowers, families. The silence presses in, thick, unsettling, yet also strangely peaceful. No footsteps echo. Only the sound of wind moving through broken windows, rattling loose frames, whispering softly against paper that still curls on the floor. Libraries hold shelves of books, their pages yellowed, some scattered across floors as if dropped in haste. Gyms stand empty, basketballs lying deflated in corners, nets torn and hanging like cobwebs. In hospitals, gurneys stand abandoned in hallways, vials and bottles still resting on counters. Coats hang on pegs, as though their owners will soon return to put them on again. The city has become an archaeological site, but unlike the ruins of Rome or the pyramids of Egypt, this one is recent, preserved not by stone, but by abandonment. To walk through Pripyat is to walk through memory, to see the trace of lives halted mid-breath. Archaeologists study pottery shards to reconstruct meals. Here, a loaf of bread sits hardened in an apartment kitchen, its story still visible without excavation. Historians dig for fragments of clothing. Here, coats remain in closets, waiting for children who never came back. And woven through it all is the invisible presence of radiation. It lingers in the soil, in the walls, in the very air. It has no taste, no smell, no shape, yet it defines the silence. It is the reason the city stands empty, untouched by human hands for decades. It is the unseen curtain between past and present, holding Pripyat in perpetual suspension. Legends have grown around this place. Some speak of ghostly figures glimpsed in the streets, shadows moving in abandoned rooms, voices whispering in the wind. Others describe the eerie glow of the Ferris wheel beneath the moonlight, as though waiting for riders who will never come. Scientists explain the silence in terms of contamination, decay, and half-lives. But for many, the city feels haunted, not by spirits in the old sense, but by memory itself, by the weight of lives interrupted, by the echoes of ordinary days that will never return. To visit Pripyat today is to feel time collapse. The 1980s linger in wallpaper patterns, in posters on school walls, in toys lying across floors. The modern world seems far away, and yet the city is not ancient. It is young, yet already ruined. It reminds us that history is not only something distant, buried deep beneath centuries, but also something that can be frozen suddenly, in our own lifetimes, leaving behind a silence that speaks louder than words. Radiation was the unseen presence that changed everything. Unlike fire or smoke, it could not be seen, heard, or touched. It had no smell, no color, no warning. For those in Pripyat, it was an invisible thread woven into the air, drifting quietly into homes, into parks, into schools. To breathe was to carry it inside. To walk outside was to touch it without knowing. And so the city became a paradox, outwardly unchanged, yet fatally altered. Scientists describe radiation in numbers, in curies and Roentgens, in particles too small to imagine. But to those who lived in Pripyat, it was felt only in its aftermath. The dizziness of firefighters, the sudden illnesses in hospitals, the quiet instructions to evacuate. It was a force as mysterious as it was real, intangible, yet powerful enough to empty a city in a single day. In the decades that followed, the city became a vast, unintended experiment in nature's resilience. Without human presence, wildlife returned. Wolves padded silently through empty streets. Deer grazed in overgrown courtyards. Birds nested in the rafters of abandoned schools. Even wild horses roamed the fields where buses once lined up. The city, though silent of human voices, filled again with the sounds of rustling leaves, the calls of owls, the patter of paws on cracked pavement. Some feared that radiation would poison every living thing. And yet, life proved stubborn, persistent. Plants grew through concrete, trees split roads, flowers bloomed in windowsills where families once kept geraniums. The exclusion zone became, strangely, a sanctuary, dangerous, yes, but alive in ways no one expected. For visitors who now walk the streets of Pripyat, the silence is thick with mystery. Guides lead small groups through apartments where toys still lie on the floor, where dolls stare with glass eyes from dusty shelves, where family photographs remain in frames. Schools echo with the faint crunch of footsteps on broken glass, corridors lined with desks and books left behind. The Ferris wheel looms above, frozen in anticipation, its yellow gondolas swaying slightly when the wind stirs. Some describe the city as haunted, not by spirits in the traditional sense, but by memory itself. To step into a room is to feel the weight of lives interrupted, teacups on tables, shoes lined neatly by doors, letters half-written. It is as though time itself retreated, leaving behind a museum of ordinary existence, paused in mid-breath. There are stories, too, whispered among visitors, of strange lights in the night, flickering in abandoned buildings, of shadows glimpsed at the edges of vision, of feelings of being watched, even when the streets are empty. Scientists explain these as tricks of light, as the mind's response to silence and decay. But the effect is undeniable. Pripyat feels alive with absence, a city where memory lingers like a presence all its own. The cultural fascination with Chernobyl has only grown. Writers describe it as a modern Pompeii, a city caught in a single moment, preserved not by ash, but by abandonment. Photographers capture its emptiness, framing the contrast of toys and dust, of bright murals peeling from walls, of nature reclaiming concrete. Filmmakers tell its story as both warning and myth, blending history with haunting imagery. For some, it is a place of tragedy. For others, a place of mystery, of ghostly silence that draws them in. And always, there is the sense that the city itself holds secrets. Rooms not yet opened, papers still scattered, belongings still waiting. Each object is an artifact, each wall a story. Archaeologists of the future may study these places as we study ruins of the past, finding in a child's notebook the story of a generation, in a cracked teacup the rhythm of a household, in a rusting Ferris wheel the dreams of a city that never came to pass. Pripyat has become a paradox, both living and dead, both ruin and memory. It reminds us that history is not only in the distant past, carved in stone or painted on cave walls. Sometimes history is sudden, recent, and fragile, preserved in silence for those who choose to listen. There are places where silence feels ordinary, like the quiet of a library or the hush of a cathedral. And then there are places where silence feels different, heavy, almost tangible, as though it carries weight of its own. In Pripyat, the silence is of this latter kind. Step into its streets, and you feel not emptiness, but presence. Visitors often speak of the strange sensation of being watched. Windows stare outward with hollow eyes, curtains tattered, frames empty, yet the gaze seems to linger. A breeze drifts through broken panes, stirring papers that shuffle softly across floors, and the sound echoes like footsteps. In classrooms, the drawings left by children still cling to walls. Faded houses, stick figures, suns shining above fields. To stand before them is to feel the absence of the hands that drew them, as though the memory itself whispers in the still air. Stories have emerged over the years, told by workers who maintain the zone, by scientists who visit for research, by tourists who walk the streets. Some describe voices, faint and indistinct, carried on the wind. Laughter of children, the cry of a mother calling her child, the murmur of a song long faded. Others claim to see shadows moving quickly across doorways or vanishing around corners. There are tales of the Ferris wheel glowing faintly under moonlight, its gondolas swaying though no wind stirred. Rational explanations abound. The mind's response to silence, the tricks of shifting light, the echo of wind against concrete walls. Yet even with reason, the stories persist, passed from person to person, carried with the same quiet insistence as folklore. For in a place like Pripyat, reason and memory intertwine, creating a space where imagination fills the void left by absence. In many ways, the city has become an archaeology of memory. Where ancient ruins reveal fragments of pottery or stone, here the fragments are modern. A child's shoe, a photograph on a wall, a calendar still open to April 1986. These objects, untouched for decades, speak not only of history, but of interruption. They are not remnants of lives lived and ended naturally, but of lives paused abruptly, never resumed. To walk among them is to walk among ghosts, not spirits of the dead, but the ghosts of unfinished days, of breakfasts left uneaten, of holidays never celebrated. Some archaeologists have begun to see Chernobyl as a site for future study, a place where the material culture of the late 20th century will be preserved in strange, unique ways. The exclusion zone is a time capsule, sealed by disaster, where everyday Soviet life lingers undisturbed. Here, a vinyl record still sits in its sleeve. There, a newspaper lies folded on a table. In another room, jars of preserves line a shelf, their labels faded, their contents long spoiled but intact. Each item carries its own quiet story, an artifact of modernity transformed into relic. And yet, alongside the scientific and historical fascination, there is always the uncanny. Tourists walking through apartments sometimes feel sudden chills, though the day is warm. Photographers speak of cameras malfunctioning, of batteries draining unexpectedly, of images appearing blurred though hands were steady. Guides, though careful to dismiss superstition, admit that the city carries an atmosphere unlike any other, not fear exactly, but something close to reverence, as though one walks through a place sacred in its silence. The myths deepen when the night falls. Under the glow of the moon, The ruins seem alive in their stillness. The Ferris wheel looms like a sentinel, its yellow gondolas pale and spectral in the silver light. The playground swings shift slightly, their chains creaking softly, though no one is there. Windows glint faintly, reflecting starlight, giving the impression of eyes watching from the darkness. And always the silence, not emptiness, but a fullness, a presence, as though the city itself remembers. To rest in these thoughts is to understand that Pripyat is not haunted in the way of old ghost stories, with rattling chains and shrieks in the night. It is haunted by memory, by the sudden stillness of a city interrupted, by the voices of thousands who left believing they would return. Their absence is its haunting, their belongings its relics, their silence its presence. And so, Chernobyl remains a mystery. A scientific site, a natural sanctuary, a cultural fascination, a modern ruin, a whispered legend. It is all of these and more. It is the silence that holds memory, the ruins that hold presence, the absence that feels alive. In Pripyat, as in every city, life was not lived equally. Though the apartments looked similar from the outside, though the same buses carried workers to the plant, there were quiet divisions, lines drawn by status, by position, by privilege. For the directors of the power plant, for the high-ranking engineers and officials, life carried certain comforts. Their apartments were larger, furnished with better materials, stocked with imported goods. They had access to special shops, where rare items, fruit from far away, bottles of wine, chocolate, appeared on shelves that others never saw. They drove cars when most walked, held gatherings in spacious dining rooms, traveled when others could not. For them, the city was not only home, but a symbol of progress, of prestige, of connection to one of the Soviet Union's proudest achievements. In contrast, the ordinary workers, the technicians, the operators, the cleaners, the drivers, lived more modestly. Their apartments were small, their cupboards often bare, their days filled with long hours at the plant or in the supporting industries that kept the city alive. Their lives were measured in wages, in queues at shops, in the steady rhythm of work and rest. They walked to bus stops, carried heavy bags from markets, and found joy in simple things. A day at the amusement park, a seat at the cinema, a picnic by the river. And beyond Pripyat, in the villages that surrounded the plant, life was simpler still. Wooden houses stood among fields and orchards. Wells provided water. Chickens scratched at the earth. These villagers had watched the city of Pripyat rise in the 1970s, marveling at its concrete towers, its bright lights, its promise of a modern world. Yet their own lives remained tied to the soil, to seasons, to traditions far older than the power station that now loomed on their horizon. The contrasts were clear. Privilege softened the lives of some, while others carried heavier loads. But when the disaster came, these lines blurred. Radiation did not distinguish between director and worker, between engineer and cleaner, between city dweller and villager. The buses that carried families away were filled with all alike, seated side by side, clutching the same bags, staring out the same windows as their homes disappeared behind them. In the aftermath, the silence equalized everything. The grand apartments of officials stood empty, their shelves still lined with goods. The modest homes of workers lay just as silent, their teacups still on tables, their clothes still hanging by doors. The wooden houses of villagers, too, were abandoned, left to crumble among overgrown fields. Privilege had mattered once in the rhythm of daily life. But in the silence that followed, all became the same, relics of lives interrupted, preserved in absence. To walk among these places today is to feel that leveling. You see the remnants of luxury, chandeliers in a director's apartment, fine china on a shelf, books imported from abroad. And then you see the simplicity, a child's toy in a worker's flat, a kettle blackened from years of use, a garden spade left leaning against a wall. And yet, in the silence, they all carry the same weight. Each is an artifact, each a whisper of the life that once moved there. This is the final lesson of Chernobyl's story, that in the face of disaster, status fades. Wealth and privilege cannot stand against the forces of nature or against the invisible tide of radiation. In the end, all shared the same silence, the same absence, the same haunting memory. And as you reflect on this, on the quiet drawing rooms of officials, the bustling kitchens of workers, the small gardens of villagers, you may feel the same calm rhythm settling in. The rhythm of lives once divided, now remembered together, held in the stillness of an abandoned city. The silence of Chernobyl is not only a silence of tragedy, it is a silence of equality, of memory, of reminder. That all lives, however different, are fragile. That all stories, however separate, are joined in the end. And so the city rests, a monument not only to disaster, but to the shared humanity of those who once called it home. And so, we leave the silent city of Pripyat, a place where clocks stopped, where windows stand empty, and where nature whispers through streets once filled with voices. We have walked its courtyards, its schools, its empty apartments. We have heard of the bravery of those who stood against fire, and of the quiet sorrow of families who never returned. We have seen how silence lingers, how memory itself haunts the ruins more than any ghost. Now, let the city fade from your mind. Let the Ferris wheel grow dim, the voices quiet, the streets dissolve into stillness. As you rest, feel the calm rhythm of your own breathing. The past is behind you, the night surrounds you, and sleep draws close. If you are still awake, I invite you softly to like this video, to subscribe, and to share it with others who may also find peace in these journeys through history. Your support helps this channel continue, bringing more stories told slowly, carefully, with the quiet meant to carry you into rest. But for now, close your eyes, drift away, sleep deeply, as silent and timeless as the city that waits beneath the stars. Good night.